The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
Knowledge is power, and this is powerful stuff. Wellness Education Cannabis Advocates of Nevada present the We Can 702 Nevada Cannabis News Hour with the We Can radio team. For the next 60 minutes, we'll take an in-depth look at the cannabis reform revolution sweeping the nation. Now, let's fire up the news hour. Here is the We Can radio team.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Weekend 702 Nevada Cannabis News Hour. Here we are after Labor Day in September, and the work year is gearing back up again, and we see that there are no slowdowns in the cannabis news industry. That's
as usual.
Sure. As usual. So we have some hot news coming out of Henderson today, Perry.
Well, good news out of Henderson. This story is out of the Las Vegas Sun by Chris Kudialis, and it was just released today, actually, or yesterday, actually. And it says basically the moratorium on recreational cannabis sales in Henderson has effectively been lifted. When recreational sales started, they put in a 6-month moratorium. That moratorium has since expired, and now they are ready to start distribution coming as soon as October, potentially, if they're willing to get their ball rolling. So I'm sure that all the business owners and customers in Henderson are excited, and hopefully they can get that tax revenue rolling and make it happen.
Absolutely, and that I think is the big reason that they are pushing forward on something like that.
Of course.
Absolutely, the owners are interested, and in the article, several owners were at the at this hearing, and I see that what do we have also present at Tuesday's meeting was Armin Yemenidigian of Essence Cannabis Dispensary, and he said the vote to open the rec sales made doing marijuana business in Henderson worth the expenses that owners are putting into the plant. He said that pot stores in Nevada break even or lose money under the medical-only model, which legalized recreational sales to make legalized recreational sales make a profit. He argued that if Nevada remained a medical-only state, more than half of the state's 60 operating pot stores would already be closed.
Yes, over half of the 60 stores would have closed that were intending on having recreational sales and had nothing to do with medical in the first place. That's very true.
Absolutely true. And I've maintained for the past several years that you walk into almost any medical marijuana establishment in the state, and you will see dispensaries that were designed and geared for rec use.
Of course. Well, look, I'm not bashing. I'm happy they're here. It's just one of those things. It's everyone has their own spin.
Yes, they do. But the idea that that all of these businesses are crying "woe is me" because we can't make money at medical cannabis. Well, maybe you should have thought about how much you were going to put into your business and how much you were going to expand that business before you actually committed the money, because it was pretty clear the size of the medical market in Nevada before these places opened up. So, well, we'll see what happens. Now, interestingly, all 5 of the owners that have been approved in the Henderson dispensaries are already entity owners in other jurisdictions here in Nevada, and so there were no new players getting into this, no fresh competition coming in. It's just taking the entrenched interests and expanding them at this point.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
So it was not a unanimous vote by any means. It was a 3-2 vote, and one of the people who was against it was Councilman Mars, and he threatened to have a 10-hour filibuster, which did not come through. And he says at the end of the article here, we should have waited to see what happened in other cities and other states. And
tired old rhetoric.
I just think that should be a motto for Nevada if he likes it. Nevada trailing behind other states.
Waiting to see what everyone else does.
Is doing. Crazy. All right.
Policy through consensus, I guess.
All right. So we've been following story for a few weeks now about the Nevada Gaming Commission and people coming into town in the marijuana industry. And there's another article by Chris Kudialis, who's really all over this topic lately. This time for Leafly.com. WWDBTV.com, and it's called Time to Leave Vegas. Gaming Commission tells cannabis trade shows. And we talked about this on the show last week, where Tony Alamo was saying that the two of them are going to stay apart, and they don't want any of these licensees going out and having anything to do with the cannabis business. But Chris takes an interesting view here that he kind of reads between the lines somewhat. And he says in the article, though no official vote was taken nor policy established, the 5-member Nevada Gaming Commission, during its monthly meeting, August 24th, unanimously agreed that casino licensees should be, quote, discouraged from hosting cannabis-related trade shows or conferences in casino spaces and ballrooms. I mean, and that's a lot. Now, you and I both went to the Marijuana Business Expo at the Rio last year, and
yes,
it was huge, and it was bringing a bunch of money into the town.
It seems funny to me that that the city has changed its overall business model. The Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority spends a disproportionate amount of their revenue attracting conventions, which is, of course, in the name of the damn charter. And yet these conventions, well, you know, we want these conventions over here, but we don't want these conventions over here. The porn convention is fine. The nightclub convention is fine. Alcohol conventions are fine. But you dopers, you know, we don't, your money's no good here. So
yeah,
you can take it elsewhere, hippies.
You know, yeah, it's a crazy thing. I mean,
it's pretty pathetic, actually, to tell you the truth.
It is. MJ Business Daily's CEO, Cassandra Farrington, said that her company was not given any sort of heads up by the commission that the strong stance would take place last week. I wouldn't expect her to have actually gotten a heads up for it. It's not that public commissions are you know, touchy-feely on the people who they serve. But she said that we're a business-to-business trade show like the World of Concrete or many other conventions.
That's right. It's not open to the public.
Absolutely, it isn't. She said the people who exhibit at our shows are grow light manufacturers, seed-to-sale software producers, packaging experts, lawyers, and accountants. There is no activated product for sale on the show floor at all. That's an interesting way of putting it. Activated product, you know. So, but the MJ Business,
unlike the nightclub convention, which gives out free samples of alcohol right there on the floor.
There you go. So their conference is not the only Las Vegas convention that's being threatened by this rule, by this meeting. There's a cannabis conference, seminar, or expo practically every month in Las Vegas this year. Wow, and many are held in casino resorts. There's a cannabis career fair this month in September, a Cannabis Nurses Network conference next month in October, and a Cannabis Processing Facility Design Seminar in November. Then there's also a group called Pharmacology University sponsoring a 2-day seminar at the Rio in October. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and you know, I think it's kind of disingenuous for the Gaming Commission to be trying to push these out of casino.
It's pretty
properties.
ridiculous. I'm just going to go back to my earlier point once again as I continue to think. It's just there are all these other cities that are gunning for our convention businesses. Orlando, which is now a medical marijuana state, is our major competitor. And they're telling them basically, not only do we not want you here, but we want to push you out to one of our competitors. What the fuck?
I don't know, but you know, it's interesting that you're saying that because you recall we mentioned in an earlier show that the Wynn Las Vegas in June removed CEO Isaac Dietrich of the Denver social media platform, Massroots, and he called for a boycott of Las Vegas, and not that his call for the boycott was, you know, that heard. However, almost a month later, on July 3rd, organizers from the Los Angeles-based MJIC Capital said that their World of Cannabis convention, which brought over 2,000 investors and industry professionals to the Palms last November, would not be returning to Vegas this year. So this is, you know, this is what the Gaming Commission wants.
Do you remember when I told you that the Gaming Commission was bad for business overall a while ago? Is that they're not just bad for business from the marijuana standpoint, they're bad for business from a gaming standpoint. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The Gaming Commission is now in the business of discouraging customers from coming to Las Vegas.
Well, you know, the interesting take on this is, of course, we've both been at Champs, which happens twice a year and is at the Las Vegas Convention convention center.
Yeah, they
now,
outgrew
that's not
it.
a gaming property. So I could see the mindset of the Gaming Commission saying, oh, these guys can still come to Vegas and give us their money. They just can't do it at a casino. Let them go to the convention
If it was
center.
me and I was an organizer, I wouldn't want to come to Vegas, to tell you the truth, at that point. Why the hell do I want to come where I'm not welcome? And not only that, but this is a totally different issue. But as Vegas continues to erode our competitive advantages over other jurisdictions, with paid parking, resort fees, high room rates, the average price of a show, if you want to attend a Las Vegas floor show, recently eclipsed $90 a person for an average ticket price. And the question is, if we can't provide these competitive advantages, why the hell should people come here?
Right. Well, it still is a unique tourist destination that has grown sometimes in spite of itself.
Sure, but if we're being openly aggressive and hostile toward an industry, why the hell would that industry want to come?
Especially when it's an industry that is experiencing significant double-digit growth.
Phenomenal growth.
And is expected to be over a $40 billion a year industry in this country by the year 2020. So it's just reluctance and reticence. I had read another story about the American Legion convention up in Reno in August, and Sue Sisley, who's a friend of the show, Dr. Sue Sisley, doing veterans studies on PTSD, had invited a number of attendees to go up to take a tour of a medical marijuana facility up there. And she said that most of them just turned her down. And they said it was pretty much because of the stigma against pot. And so we have that stigma in the mind of veterans who could be helped, who have PTSD.
Right.
We've got that same stigma manifesting itself in the minds of people on public commissions.
It's funny, though, because you would think that the only color that people like that see is green, and considering cannabis and cash have the same color, there would be no question about what the answer would be. And even in the face of all the progress we've made, you can't beat back good old-fashioned rhetoric, I guess.
I guess not. So, also this week in Vegas, just yesterday, I believe it was, the county commission has now stated that pot possession and advertising are going to be illegal on the grounds of McCarran Airport.
Terrible news, but okay, let's talk about that for a minute.
Sure, and that ties in with what Allegiant is doing.
Allegiant, I supposedly has contracted, or how do they put this? Every single airline has their own little in-flight magazine that you get. As soon as you sit down, you get bored and you start flipping through it. Well, they have decided to allow local cannabis dispensary owners to advertise within that in-flight magazine, which kind of goes against what the county is saying is legal now. Like, how are we going to enforce these regulations? Let's say, okay, the county says marijuana advertising is not allowed at the airport. Okay, well, now you have airplanes coming in with advertisements for marijuana on them. Are you going to stop this locally chartered airline from doing business? Of course not, because like you said, they're private property, so maybe that's not the same. But what about a taxi cab?
Well, what if someone who is a patient or just a citizen of the state comes to the airport and picks somebody up or drops somebody off, and they have cannabis in their car and it's parked in the garage and they're not using it or anything, but they're still in violation of this. So
it's legal, but it's not legal. Once again, this is the conundrum we face. It's legal and we fought for these rights, but we're still shoved to the underground of society because of this evil that we're providing the public, supposedly. It's kind of funny.
Well, yeah, and there are people who strongly believe that it is evil. It's amazing. You think that they say a plant is evil, not the people's motivations who are involved in anything in the world. Anyway, so Allegiant is selling ad space to Acres Cannabis, which is a Las Vegas dispensary that opened up just this past May, and it will be the first weed-related advertising to find its way into a major airline's magazine when it appears in a full-page ad in Allegiant's Sunseeker magazine, company John Mueller said. The ad is scheduled to run through the end of October, and as Mr. Mueller said, the campaign creates another first for the marijuana industry and helps propel all of us towards mainstream acceptance. And I've got to agree with that.
No doubt.
The more that people see it, the more that people are aware of it, the less
and the more they're desensitized to it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we're going to see what happens here. The FAA weighed in on this in this article, and they said that or the article says that while airlines are subject to some local ordinances, the ultimate regulator is, of course, the Federal Aviation Administration, and reached for comment last Friday morning. A FAA spokesman, Ian Gregor, said that magazine advertising is not an issue that that the authority prioritizes. We're a safety agency.
What's the first word in federal? What's the first word in FAA? It's federal, right?
Federal.
I don't know.
Well, we'll talk about them after we come back from a quick break.
Hello, I'm Abra McGrath. Please join me for the Health and Wellness Hour here at Luminosity Wellness Center and all the other great shows at WWDBTV.com.
Hi, I'm Joe Peroni.
And I'm Heidi Mancini, and we're the hosts of The Rise Above Show. Check us out on WWDB-TV on Thursday afternoons at 2 p.m.
Hi, I'm Sandy Castell. Join me weekly for tips on how to stay fit and fabulous forever on The Sandy Castell Show. I'll see you there.
And welcome back to the show. All right, in regional news, up in Washington State, the Initiative 502, the state's legal pot law, under that initiative, the Washington State Institute for Public Safety is required to conduct periodic cost-benefit analyses of legalization on issues ranging from drug driving to prenatal uses of marijuana. And we have an article by Bob Young of the Seattle that we're looking at here, and Bob says that one of those reports was due on Friday after 3 years of legal sales, but the report was limited in scope to just a few impacts, including the degree of youth use and adult use, treatment, admissions, and criminal convictions. At the end of last year, the industry accounted for the equivalent of 6,227 full-time jobs, according to the report, whose mission is to provide nonpartisan practical research. Wages paid from 2014, when the first businesses were licensed, through 2016 were $286 million.
Oh my.
And with an average wage in the industry of $16.45, although that average wage is skewed upwards by a few people who were, like chief growing officers and
Sure.
who were getting
Sure.
big bonuses. So the median wage was $13.44 an hour, which is still not a terrible wage. It's not the big money that everybody thought when they were going to get into a pot business.
For trim and dope, it's not so bad.
I guess. Well, I guess not. Back in the old days, when it was an illicit market and the trimmers were smoking along through their day, but that whole paradigm has changed, because that's not happening in any of the commercially licensed facilities.
Right.
Anyway. What I found interesting in this article is that the think tank's findings on youth use were not surprising, they said. So they were expecting that the usage was not going to go up among kids, and indeed that's what they found. Pot use by students in all 4 grades that they measured, which is 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th, those usage levels were stable or have fallen slightly since I-502 was enacted. For instance, 17% of the 10,835 high school sophomores surveyed last year said they had consumed pot in the previous month. 17%. That level was 18% in 2006 and 20% in 2010. So the legalization of cannabis in Washington has taken away some of that forbidden fruit nature that the kids just can't resist.
That's the only thing I can think of.
I would want to try anything when I was a kid, especially if the people in charge said, that's bad for you.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, taking that away has reduced that temptation, and so the overall feedback on this is that there is no great change, and that really strikes a different note than what Attorney General Sessions has been saying in his letters to the governors and top cops in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Alaska so far. So he's presenting drug war propaganda, and they're coming back and hitting him with fact, and I think that's a real good thing.
It's always a good thing to see that less and less kids are using pot. You know, if I could go back and redo my life, I probably would have waited a couple more years instead of the ripe old age of 13 to start smoking.
Yeah, not
just because, you know, the same
I'm
thing.
glad I never touched it.
It's the same reason why you probably shouldn't drink alcohol so much. It just doesn't do kids any favors. You know?
It definitely doesn't, and I don't. And
it creates friction between parents, school authorities, etc. You know, it's no bueno.
And the only exception, of course, are you see all these heartbreaking medical cases of kids with various medical conditions of
of course, there's medical exceptions. That's why the law was written.
Exactly. So I mean that's an absolutely legitimate use. All right, moving on a little bit closer to home here in Utah, we followed this story earlier in the year that a Utah Patients Collective was gearing up for a medical marijuana initiative on Utah's ballot next year.
Good luck.
And they just coming out on the 1st. We've got. Coming from Michael Bachara over at Hemp News, he tells us that the campaign to place medical cannabis initiative on the November 2018 ballot has entered their signature gathering phase. The Utah Patients Coalition are collecting signatures throughout the state and are assembling teams on a daily basis. To qualify for the ballot, more than 113,000 valid signatures are required. On August 10th, the Utah Medical Cannabis Act received approval from Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox to begin gathering signatures after supporters held 10 public hearings across the state and met with various state departments and stakeholders. So this is something that we're going to be watching over the course of the next year, being a neighbor state, and it will be very interesting to see if you can have a blood red state like Beehive, Utah, pass a medical marijuana bill. Then I would say the time has come for Congress to just
It'll also bridge the island to the island of Colorado, basically.
Yes, it absolutely
They're kind of stuck all alone over there.
It absolutely will. So the full text of this initiative is available online, and a summary of the proposal is available on the Utah Patients Coalition website, and links to that are going to be available in the additional notes and data on that accompany this YouTube video. So we'll see. We're going to see what's happening with that. I expect that it will pass.
You think so?
Oh, I do.
I've read a couple of articles that say that there are very small groups of LDS moms and people like that who are trying to persuade certain church elders that this is kind of the way to go, this medical way, because if you kind of look at their dogma, it kind of fits in with what the Mormons kind of believe. And when I say kind of, I'm using that term very loosely, is because they're all about like holistic medicine, natural healing, nothing artificial and this and that. And if you kind of take that broad-based approach, this kind of is lopped in with that. So if they can kind of find a little bit of middle ground between logic and their dogma, they could kind of come to something there.
Of course, the church elders are still strongly opposed to it.
For sure. But there are subsections of their culture even that want access because very possibly they have children or family members who want access to this, and they don't want to be refugees from their promised land as they see it in order to seek treatment. So they want to find that common ground, and I'm hoping that voice gets brought to the forefront here in the not too distant future. But for now, just one signature at a time, one step at a time. So
yes, absolutely. But with Mormon population states around them, like Nevada and Arizona, that already have medical marijuana programs, I would think that would, and essentially, as you mentioned, being almost surrounded by a sea of states that have already legalized it, I think that they're going to realize it is not this terrible thing that they've been lied to in the propaganda wars. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
But moving on a little further up, what's happening in Alaska?
Well, we're staying on the West Coast. We got two stories coming out of Alaska, and the first one I want to talk about is kind of it's something that I had never really considered before, but of course it's just another hoop to jump through. The article is entitled that the state is now allowing marijuana businesses to apply for the Made in Alaska logo. If you've ever lived in Alaska, they're very protective of their, I don't want to say manufacturing base, but their ability to say that what's made here really was
their local industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have this very strong Made in Alaska campaign. There's the white and the black polar bear that are kind of interlocking, and if you see that, you really know like it was legit made there, and you can kind of take faith in that. And a lot of these local cultivators and operators have expressed interest in putting that stamp on, which of course is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not really necessary, because at this point there's no
It would
interstate,
have to be made in Alaska.
Exactly.
Yeah,
There's no
of
interstate
course.
commerce allowed at this time. So, of course, it's going to be made in Alaska. But I feel like it's just kind of like a sense of pride for those people to say, look, like, this is ours and this belongs to us. So when these people come in, it's just something for them to be able to label up. And
the reason that they're able to do this is because this Made in Alaska thing is a state program that receives no funding from the federal government.
It's just them.
So many state programs of varying sorts take federal money, even if it's only 5% or so. But taking that money will preclude them from doing anything with cannabis-related industries whatsoever. So since this is a homegrown Alaska project, they are able to take that. And because there's another Alaska label that would appeal to growers, except they can't actually use it because that program receives some federal
You see,
money.
unfortunately, it talks about this later in the article, is that there's another logo. You've actually seen me wear the shirt on the program before. It says Alaska Grown, and it has a picture of Alaska. That's kind of like a coalition of Alaska farmers who do their best to help that.
Producers.
But marijuana businesses are still barred from using the official Alaska Grown label put on by the state agricultural products, because that program indeed does receive federal funding. The Made in Alaska program does not. So, like you said, they're allowed to use one, not the other. You know, you can guess which one they want to use, but they'll settle for the Made in Alaska logo.
Sure.
And it's like this gentleman here said, one of these commissioners, it's a wrinkle, but an easy one to smooth out. So I'm happy to see that the state is willing to give that designation to these growers. So
it's just a little bit more legitimacy that comes down the pike. Every step that the industry takes by normalizing relations and perceptions from anything else is I think, moving in the proper direction.
Always. Well, another last story coming out of Alaska for today is that with a lot of the new cultivators coming online, is that they're starting to, the state is starting to see some real tax revenue finally, big bumps. The marijuana tax revenues breaking state records, which projections for the month of July expected to yield the most money from cannabis cultivators to date. Of course, they anticipate collecting more than $571,000 for July, bringing the total tax since legalization to more than $2.5 million.
Now that well, in my pocket or yours, that would be a chunk of change. But for tax purposes, especially with Nevada looking at $33 million potentially this year, that does not sound like a lot of money. But then Alaska doesn't have nearly the tax base.
No, don't kid yourself. Money is money, and the governor is struggling right now with his own little internal political problems. He recently cut down a lot of the Alaska state dividend, which are the yearly checks that people are expected to receive because of the oil revenues that come in. He took that away in order to try to fill the budget shortfalls that are coming up. So any pressure that could be alleviated on the budget whatsoever is something that he can go back to and kind of work with, because the people are not happy about getting their dividends taken away. So they want to try to find other sources, and as this continues to come online, I would expect the people on the state level to push ever so harder to get as much revenue out of this as possible, to take their eyes off of them.
Do you have any idea roughly how many people live in Alaska? I mean,
less than 1 million. The
less
last
than
time, less than 1 million.
That's roughly a third of Nevada
Their
population.
If you had made me guess, there's probably 750,000 full-time residents.
And of that, besides the dividend check, a significant number of them are on some form of public assistance, being native tribes and this and that and everything. So
absolutely, there's also the Alaska.
Absolutely,
there's also the Alaska Pioneers program. If you've lived there for more than X number of years, you get an additional check, and there's all kinds of stuff going on up there. So yeah, they need the money for sure.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. And I know we had talked about another story briefly in a town that you're familiar with the locals having a little bit of a fun.
Well, there was an article that came out in the Review Journal either today or yesterday that was talking about Talkeetna, where I was fortunate enough to go to high school. Now, just as a little background, Talkeetna has 8 fully established liquor license bars in a town of just over 800 or 900 people.
Wow.
Basically, what I'm saying is that the entire population of the said town could be contained within those bars and not be at full occupancy easily. But regardless, the overly conservative nature of some of the old school residents there are having a big problem with the fact that there has been a marijuana dispensary that has been allowed to open their doors, not even in they wanted to open downtown, and the people are just like, oh, we don't want that here, and this and that, but it's a little too late, unfortunately. And really the dynamic is the older versus the younger generation, as the older generation seeks to it's funny because a couple of the hotel operators that are trying to lobby against it are the same ones who see the big alcohol revenue come in through their doors. But it was kind of disheartening for me to see such a progressive town like Talkeetna, which has had a cat as their mayor,
yes,
for the past 18 years because they didn't like people telling them what to do. Take such an authoritarian approach all of a sudden. Like now they hate government, but when it comes to weed, well, now we need government to stop this. And, thank God it didn't go down. But I did think it was funny that where the gentleman chose to put his cultivation facility is directly across the street from the old state trooper's office, which is now closed. And a couple of the concerns that the residents had was the potential for an increase in crime because with the state budget shortfalls that I've talked about, the governor decided to close that trooper station. So now the nearest police officers are more than an hour away from Talkeetna. And I don't know what crime they feel is going to increase, but that was a concern of theirs.
I would imagine a lot of the residents carry firearms, so
they do. Everyone carries.
I would think it's still a relatively safe town, even if there are no police directly in the town.
Property crime, it happens. Houses get broken into and things like that. But violent crime is pretty low up there for sure, unless it's of course alcohol related. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's crazy. Part of it is that in this story, I saw one of the alcohol side of this. One of these people say, "Oh well, people voted for legalization and they voted for this, but they didn't know what they voted for, and when they voted for, they weren't expecting this, and they thought they were voting for something
that's what the regulatory process is for.
But that's the talking point line of Kevin Sabet and Sam, the smart approaches to marijuana that we've
people
been
are too dumb to know what they're
guys,
voting for,
and they're a prohibitionist group, of course, and so it is exactly that line of propaganda that years ago. I mean, I remember Tom Collins, a former county commissioner, saying to me when I brought up pot one time, he said, "Well, the people had a chance to vote on that and they voted it down. They spoke against it." Okay, fine. Now you have the people are voting for it, and the other side says, "Oh well, yeah, but they didn't mean that when they voted for it.
So
just
basically,
they pulled yes on the lever, they really meant no."
So when the constituents vote for something that I agree with as a politician,
I'm
all for them.
But
they're well informed. But now they're too stupid to make an informed decision because it happens to be cannabis. That's very interesting.
Crazy. It is. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be back soon.
My name is Janine Evans, and I am the office manager at Getting Legal, and we help people get their medical marijuana cards. Anyone can be approved for a medical marijuana card as long as they have a pre-existing medical condition. The medical conditions recognized in Nevada include severe pain, severe nausea, muscle spasms, seizures, glaucoma, cancer, HIV or AIDS, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Our staff helps every patient determine before they come in for a visit whether or not they will qualify. We take care of the whole process of getting a medical marijuana card from the state of Nevada from start to finish. Our services include paperwork processing, a physician's visit, notary services. All of our patients pick up their approval letters right here in our office. We make it fast, simple, and easy. During your consultation, we will discuss different products available at the dispensaries, such as edibles, lotions, and concentrates. We will also discuss different ways to medicate, such as smoking or vaporizing. You will receive a separate identification card identifying you as a medical marijuana patient. This is used to enter the dispensaries and only to enter the dispensaries. Every veteran receives a discount off of the full price of their card. We also offer discounts to anyone working within the medical marijuana industry. All you need to do is call 702-979-9999 and a member of our friendly staff will help you schedule an appointment.
Bring her in.
Yep. Welcome back to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. Thank you for joining us. We have another section coming out of our favorite place in the world, Washington, D.C. So,
and that's by Tom Angel of Mass Roots.
Roots.
Tom is absolutely doing great work. We've come to rely on him more and more as a source here, and he's just doing wonderful things.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm like, I see his name a lot on our stories these days.
And he is really making himself a presence in this movement, and kudos to Tom. Absolutely.
Well, as much as our fearless leader Trump has been complaining about his inability to put the people he wants into office, he has successfully put in his new drug czar.
Well, actually he's now.
Or has he nominated him?
Nominated
okay.
him, and he will have to undergo a Senate confirmation hearing, but that's seen as pretty pro forma. This fellow is a member of Congress. This is Representative Tom Marino of Pennsylvania. He will be the new head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, a role commonly known as the drug czar.
I wish they pick a new name for that.
I think a czar is a perfect title for someone who has an autocratic rule over the masses.
It's true, but it's so
un-American.
It is, and publicly accepted among an American guy. You know what I mean? Like, even the politicians are like, "Oh yeah, he's the drug czar." It's just like, you can't call him that as a congressman.
This term started in the mid-1970s during the Nixon administration, at the time of the first oil embargo, and Nixon appointed what was called an energy czar to oversee all things related to the oil crisis. And since then, there have been housing czars and drug czars and crime czars.
So it was a title just bestowed on a whim.
Yeah,
okay.
Essentially. That's where it came out. But anyway, Tom Marino has been in office as member of Congress since 2011, and he has consistently voted against marijuana law reform on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. And there are a bunch of them here. For example, he voted 3 times against amendments to prevent the Justice Department from interfering with state medical marijuana laws. And what that is, we've talked about this on the program. It originally was known as the Hinchy-Rohrbacher Amendment, and then Hinchy retired, and it's the Rohrbacher-Farr Amendment now, which essentially blocks the Department of Justice, under which operates the DEA, from spending $1 in investigation or prosecution of medical marijuana crimes in medical marijuana states, and that is a huge thing. We've talked about on the show any number of times, and just in the last couple of shows we talked about a fellow who had his case. He had already been convicted but wasn't sentenced, and he essentially had that vacated because the government can't spend any money on it. Well, that's the way it goes.
Well, this gentleman also opposed a broader amendment to protect all state laws from Justice Department interference.
He voted 3 times against amendments to allow military veterans to receive medical cannabis recommendations through the Department of Veterans Affairs.
As so many people who claim to love veterans have.
What a compassionate guy.
He also consistently opposed measures to allow industrial hemp, which has no psychoactive ingredients whatsoever.
Right, and has been signed into law in the Farm Bill of 2014, and he was just dead set against it. And this is something that even
how can you be against hemp?
Even people like Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul supported
Kentucky farmers. Support Kentucky farmers.
Supported industrial hemp production. Okay, let's see. He even voted against a measure sponsored by a fellow Pennsylvania Republican to protect limited state cannabidiol medical cannabis programs from federal interference. CBDs. Everybody knows that CBD-based oils are not psychoactive at all, but this fellow, no good there.
Well, no surprise. He's a former state and federal prosecutor who makes his living looking for ways to take people's freedom away.
Yep, and in testimony before the House and Ways and Means Committee last year, Marino appeared to advocate for forced hospitalization of people who use drugs. Now get this. One treatment option, and I'm quoting him here, that I have advocated for years would be placing non-dealer, non-violent, drug abusers in secured hospital-type settings under the constant care of health professionals, he wrote. Once the person agrees to plead guilty for possession, he or she will be placed in an intensive treatment program until experts determine that they should be released under intense supervision.
So you want to forcibly put people in psych wards for smoking pot?
Yes.
For an indefinite amount of time?
That's exactly what he's saying.
That is completely insane.
He says, he continues here, that if this is accomplished, then the charges are dropped against that person. So you've got to commit
So once
yourself
you
into
extort once you're extorted into pleading guilty for smoking cannabis, you have the option to, what the fuck, dude?
And he
what a red-blooded American this guy is.
Yeah, he seems he's being compassionate here because he says the charges are only filed to have an incentive for that person to enter the hospital/prison, if you want to call it. Well, that's what he's calling it, a hospital/prison. This guy, you know.
Well, despite consistently voting against amendments to allow states to implement their own marijuana laws without harassment, he told the Williamsport Sun-Gazette last year that, quote, "I'm a states' rights guy. The less federal government in my life, the best. I think it's a states' rights issue. If Pennsylvania passes it and I don't like it, I can pick up and move."
And Pennsylvania did pass it. So,
well, he did move to D.C.
Well, yeah, but no, he still represents Pennsylvania, so I'm sure he has a spot there. But you know,
I love these phony states' rights guys, these phony Republicans who are all about states' rights, except when you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think he's a phony Republican. I'm sure he's very true in that, but I think
he is to me.
His view has strayed from where the Republican Party was, from the moral center of what the Republican Party was. Dwight Eisenhower could not get elected in today's environment. It just wouldn't happen. So let's see. Now here's a story a little closer to home for me, having grown up in New York City and knowing that under the draconian Rockefeller laws, which were enacted in the late 70s, New York had some of the toughest drug sentencing crimes in the nation, and New York City has remained since the Giuliani administration in the early 90s to be the drug arrest capital of the United States. And fortunately, we do have reform coming through. It's changing, and it's reform that's coming through not from the governor, not from the state legislature, not even from the city council passing ordinances, but from the Manhattan District Attorney. And the article here, which I found on Politico.com, written by Brendan Cheney, is that Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance announced that his office is changing its plea guidelines for marijuana arrests to lighten penalties for first and second-time offenders effective Tuesday. So this is in effect as of now. These sentencing guidelines for marijuana possession in the Manhattan DA's office previously offered a 12-month adjournment in contemplation of dismissal. It's called an ACD. For the first offense, where the case is adjourned for 12 months and then is dismissed and sealed if the defendant isn't arrested again. And it's a fairly simple procedure. I've been through it. I was standing up for disabled persons' rights, pissed off a parking violations person, and wound up getting arrested for obstructing governmental administration. When we went to court without hearing any evidence, without anything other than the two attorneys showing up, the judge said, "All right, ACD." Yep, okay, bang, and that was it. And that was the last I saw of it because, of course, I stayed out of trouble. So it's basically like a ticket, and if you don't get rearrested, it's gone. So it's a pretty good program. So on the second offense, the previous guidelines allowed for the defendant to plea to a marijuana violation or a disorderly conduct violation. So they're changing that now. So the first two violations are going to be ACD'd away, and whereas previously third and subsequent would be subject to a criminal violation, they're now going to allow these people to take a plea to a disorderly conduct violation for those subsequent offenses. So the Manhattan DA's office is going to offer the ACD for 3 months for the first offense and 6 months for the second offense, as compared to a year for other crimes. So they're actually shortening the window that you have to stay out of trouble and not get rearrested.
It's positive steps, but what this is telling me is they're still going to arrest you and drag you in for possession of pot.
No, what this is the district attorney's office saying we're going to either not prosecute these crimes or treat them much more lightly, and that will hopefully guide in to the police, the NYPD, the police department,
trickle down
to say, stop arresting these people because we're not going to prosecute
Okay.
them. And officers, members of the police department, have to justify their arrests. And if they have a
Sure they
string
do.
of arrests, if they have a string of arrests that result in acquittals or dismissals, don't get prosecuted, they get grief from their superior officers. So Vance, DA Vance explained the decision in a statement, saying that a year is too long to have an open criminal case for a low-level, non-violent offense because
No doubt.
because it's publicly searchable. You get arrested, there are sites all over the internet that are happy to spray that information out to anybody who will pay for it. So Vance said that no one should be denied a home or a college education for something as trivial as pot possession. Well, here, DA Vance, that is absolutely spot on, and
hard to argue with that.
And the thing is, this is something that is done out of one political office taking a stance and saying this is just over the top, and it's something.
Here's something I'm not necessarily down with. Offering an ACD instead of a plea to a violation on the second offense means the defendant's record is clear that they haven't been arrested again. Undocumented immigrants can be deported based on these violations. That sucks.
Yes.
That's.
It does.
I mean, to get deported. I mean,
you're deported over smoking a joint.
Well,
yes.
you're towing the line as an illegal also right now. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like trying to figure out how to go navigate that catch-22 between the fact, like, if you're an illegal and you can't apply for citizenship because you came here illegally, trying to chew through that. Now you have this. Fuck.
It's tough. Before we take a break here, I also want to cover something quickly about the American Legion and at their national convention in Reno towards the end of August, they adopted a resolution urging the federal government to allow the Department of Veterans Affairs doctors to discuss and recommend medical marijuana in states where it's legal, adding to the group's efforts to get cannabis in the hands of veterans that could help. And this comes from Stars and Stripes, which is the military magazine.
No kidding.
By Nikki Wintling. Yep. The resolution was passed at the national convention in Reno and was authored by an American Legion member out of Ohio. And he said he'd just been hearing over and over and over again from veterans who use marijuana as an alternative to addictive opioids. And Ohio has the fourth largest opioid addiction fatality problem in the country.
Jesus.
So this is something that's very serious for him. And the American Legion represents 2 million veterans. And President Donald Trump spoke Wednesday during their convention. At the convention, he described the group as a very powerful organization. What an eloquent man! But this is some place that has the president's ear, and so hopefully this group will be able to make some moves forward on this. And we have a tweet of the week, which this week comes from Dina Titus, Representative Dina Titus, who said, "Thank you at American Legion for adopting a resolution supporting VA doctors discussing medical marijuana with vets. GOP must hold vote." And I've got to agree with Dina on this. The federal government, the Congress, does need to hold a vote on this, because I think if they actually went to that it would be rescheduled.
I'd like to see who would vote against veterans having access to medical cannabis.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear their justification for that.
Well,
And we got to pay the bills. So.
yeah, we're going to take a quick break and be right back.
Crazy Terry here with your car care tip of the day. So it's not a bad idea every now and then to check your battery. If you don't know how to do it, have somebody check it for you. Just a visual inspection can tell you a lot about your battery. So as we can see here, this battery's got a hold down. It's nice and tight. The cables are on. They don't look bad. We've got a cover. We don't see any corrosion. Everything's kind of tight, looking good. A little bit of dirt, that's normal, but nothing's leaking, no real cause for alarm here. So that's a good sign. Doesn't mean it's good, but at least visually we know that it's intact. Okay, so we're looking at a battery here that shows signs of corrosion. We want to test that battery to make sure it's good. Usually when they're getting like this, there's going to be a problem, leaking some acid at the top. We ran the test and we find out it has 396 cold cranking amps, but the battery requires 650. So it's just not enough. The battery is going to go soon. Better to know now than later. Okay, so the benefits of checking the cable is because this cable's rotted out. What we'll find is this is the problem, not the battery. So it'll save you from buying a battery, still having the no start, only to find out that it's a cable. This type of corrosion is common in diesels. Okay, so we're getting ready to jump the car, but we have to have some battery cables. And we have to check those too before we hook them up to the battery. So here we have our standard set of battery cables. We just look them over, see if the ends are frayed, if everything's connected all right. Everything looks good here. Wouldn't hurt to check the rest of the cable just to make sure the dog didn't get it and chew it up. We have red and black. Red's positive, black's negative. You always want to hook the positive up first and then the negative. And I'll show you how that's done right now. Keep these off to the side so they're not touching each other. Hook up your positive. You can find that right here by the plus sign, the negative sign. Plus is positive, red. Make sure that's securely hooked up. Keeping these away from each other. Hook up your negative cable. Just got to fight it on there. Figure out a way to get it. Wiggle it a little bit so it ensures a good connection. Now you're transferring voltage. If I hit these two together, we're going to spark. Kind of want to avoid that. Won't kill you. Kind of fun. A lot of people think if they can turn the headlights on, the battery's fine. That's not always the case. It takes very little amperage to turn a light on, but it takes a lot of amperage to start the starter. I recommend checking the charging system every oil change. At Sun Valley Automotive, there's never a charge for that. This is Crazy Terry with your car care tip of the day.
Welcome back to the final segment of this week's Nevada Cannabis News Hour. We have a story out of Nebraska, one of our prohibitionist targets. For sure, we're doing our best, but the Nebraska Attorney General has been aggressively against the legalization efforts that have happened in Colorado. He feels like there's a lot of trickle over from there that he doesn't want to deal with, and
they filed a federal lawsuit.
Oh, he hates. Oh yeah.
Program.
And he has indicated or reaffirmed actually that any cannabidiol or any products containing cannabidiol will remain illegal in the state of Nebraska for the foreseen future. Less than 2 weeks after stores started selling CBD hemp products in the Omaha metro area, Nebraska's AG sent a memo to law enforcement and county attorneys about the products. The memo said in part, recent reports of potential sales of the controlled substance cannabidiol, commonly referred to as CBD, compels the Nebraska Attorney General's office in conjunction with the Nebraska, I keep saying Nevada, sorry, the Nebraska State Patrol to issue the following clarification regarding the legality of cannabidiol under Nebraska law. It went on to refer several state statutes to say that to date, no drug products containing cannabidiol have received FDA approval. True. Therefore, other than the authorized UMMC study, remains illegal to possess, manufacture, or distribute. However, Donald Anderson, owner of the new CBD American Shaman location at 20th and P, say there is a misunderstanding of what he sells. They're classifying what I'm selling as a marijuana product. It is not. It is an infused hemp product. He says it is under 0.3% THC, so he claims it to be legal. Unfortunately, this gentleman may have to prove his case in court.
He may, and this American Shaman, I did a little study into them, and they're actually based in Kansas, which is also
another state that they're getting trouble. Yeah,
they're having trouble with, and so they have like 4 locations in Kansas, and they've expanded into this. They've franchised out into Nebraska with this fellow, and the Attorney General in Nebraska is relying on the fact that the DEA recently, last December, scheduled CBD as Schedule 1, and so it can't be
insane
any sort of medicine and all. And the thing is, though, that even though the DEA decided to schedule CBD in this manner, the DEA is a part of the executive branch of the government. That means they do not have the ability to implement new laws or change existing laws. That's the purview of the legislative branch. And on top of that, as we talked a little earlier, the they can have an emergency scheduling, and which they do like with bath salts and stuff.
I was just going to say, I've seen them successfully pull it off.
However, CBD is not something that has changed in the last few millennia, and so they can't say, oh, this is a new emergency that we found. And with the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, the DEA cannot spend penny one to go after something like this, and so we'll see how this develops. But I think that this is an overreach by the Nebraska Attorney General, and
better reach for the stars than come up with mud.
I guess so.
You know, he's gonna go for it and see, throw it against the wall and see what sticks.
Moving north just a little bit to Minnesota now. I have a release from the Minnesota House of Representatives and the 2017 State Fair poll results, which were just released. And the reason this is interesting to me is right under that title, the very first thing that they say, the subtitle is recreational marijuana favored by slim majority of fair poll takers. And the article, the piece starts off, and this was released by the Minnesota House of Representatives Public Information Services. It says just over half of all state fairgoers who cast votes in an annual poll support legalizing recreational marijuana for persons 21 or older. Of the 7,122 votes cast in this 2017 House of Representatives State Fair poll, 50.6% back the idea, with 39.7% opposed and the rest remaining undecided.
Okay.
And this is conducted by nonpartisan House of Public Information Services, and they ask all sorts of other things in this about online betting and about alcohol and this and that and everything. But the number one thing they had was that people in the state of Minnesota are looking to legalize pot. So I think that's a pretty good thing because we're going to continue this revolution and evolution through the country. Mm-hmm. All right, well, that's about all the time we've got for today. Check out our YouTube channel. The more information, we have links to these stories, other stories that we didn't get to today as well. And as always, we're here to bring you news with context and commentary and let you know what's going on in the cannabis world.
And we'll see you next week on WWDBTV.com. Thank you so much for joining.
Have a good one.